So there are a couple of ways in Java to output dates, and you want to be able to make date outputs like this. Let's take a look at what we can do. We can output dates the raw format. We can also apply certain formats. We can do that with the date and the calendar classes. But then there's also a more modern approach using the date.time package, which also allows us to apply lots of different types of formats. There's also the issue of time zones that can gracefully be handled in Java, as well as calculating days based on certain factors. And then I also wanted to dive into a topic that I find very interesting, and that's other calendars, such as the Jewish or Hebrew date, or the Muslim or Hijri date. Alright, more on that later in this video. Let's take a look at the available options we have and cover both the theoretical part as well as practical code examples that you can use in your projects. Alright, dates are represented as objects, and they can be formatted and displayed in various ways. This is particularly useful when you need to represent date-related information to users or integrate with external systems. There are quite a few Java classes out there that offer ways to output dates. It's worth noting that dates and times are distinct concepts. A date represents a specific point in time, such as this. A time represents a specific moment within the day, such as this. Probably one of the simplest ways in Java to create a date is to use the date class. By simply creating a new instance of date, you already have a current date in your hands, on which you can build more logic. Using the toString method, outputs the date as a string. This provides a default string representation, which may not always be suitable. For more control over the formatting, the simpleDateFormat class can be used to specify a certain pattern. This can be used to define a certain format, such as this one. There are also things to consider. The simpleDateFormat class is thread unsafe, so use it cautiously in multi-threaded environments. Just keep that in mind, because there's also the date.time formatter class offering thread safety. We will walk through an example in just a moment. As many things in Java, there usually are multiple options. For date formatting, there's also the mentioned date.time formatter. This class provides a more flexible and modern approach to formatting dates and times. It offers various predefined formats and also allows you to create custom patterns. There's also the class java.time, but just like the date class, these classes are part of Java from the early versions. They have known issues like the mentioned thread safety and complexity. They are generally discouraged for new development, but might be necessary for interoperability with older code or systems. An often spoken about newer alternative to date is located in the java.time package, which was introduced in Java 8. Before jumping into the rather modern approaches, I want to show you a couple of code examples of how to use the older ones. Let's take a look at some code. In all my programming videos, I mentioned that I upload codes onto GitHub. And just like the other videos on this channel, I have also uploaded the entire code example of this video. This way, you have the possibility to check it out for yourself, and also at your own pace. You can freely use the code for whatever purpose you require. Links to the repository can be found in the video description below. Alright, so here we have a Maven project, and we also have 2 build scripts and 2 run scripts. Now if you use Windows, you're going to use the CMD scripts for build and run, and if you use Mac or Linux, you're going to use the shell scripts for build and run. Alright, now let's start by creating a new class dateExample, implementing the runnable interface, which brings us to also implement the run method. Let's announce what we are doing, dates using date class, and then let's create a new instance of date and save it in a new variable current date of type date. Now let's create a new simple date format in which we place our desired format. We put the new instance in a new variable, formatter A, of type simple date format. In case you want to change the format, you just pick the appropriate letter. Let's also create a second instance of simple date format with this format and save it in a new variable, formatter B, of type simple date format. Let's also create a third simple date format with this format and save it in formatter C of type simple date format. To apply the format of formatter A, we use the format method, which takes the value that we have in our current date variable. The result is a string, which we save in a new variable, formatted date A of type string. Let's do the same thing for formatter B, which we save in a new variable, formatted date B, and for formatter C, which we save in a new variable, formatted date C. Now let's print all those values. Let's start by printing the raw date that we have in current date. After that, we print the current date formatted A, then B, and then C. Alright, now let's put it all together in the main method. Let's create a new instance of dateExample and run it. Now let's build and run the application. And here we can see the 4 lines of output, starting by the raw date, which looks like this, then the current date formatted A, which looks like this, B, which looks like this, and C, which looks like this. Alright, now let's create another class. Let's create the class calendar example implementing runnable, which also brings us to implement the run method. Then we announce what we are doing, dates using calendar class, and then we get ourselves a first calendar instance, which we save in a new variable calendar of type calendar. Now we want to print the date, and for that let's create a new method, convert calendar to string, taking the calendar instance as a parameter, and then we extract the date info from the calendar parameter. We do this making use of the get method, and then we provide what value we want. So let's get the year, then the month, where we also add +1, because the month starts with a 0. Then we get the day of the month, the hour of the day, the minute, and the second. Alright, this method returns a string. So let's format one by making use of the string format method. So we first get 4 digits for the year, then a dash, then 2 digits for the month, then a dash, then 2 digits for day of month, then a blank, then 2 digits for hour of day, then a colon, then 2 digits for minute, then a colon, and 2 digits for seconds. Alright, now let's get that result and put it into a new string variable, extracted date A. Let's also print it to the terminal, current date and time, extracted date A. Now let's take a look at how to set a specific date. This can easily be done using the set method, in which we provide 2021, January, and 10. Now let's make use of our method again, convert calendar to string, and put it into a new variable, extracted date B, and also print it, specific date, extracted date B. Now let's take a look at how to add days. This can easily be done using the add method, in which we define what we add, in this case day of month, and then the number, which is 10. Let's again make use of our convert calendar to string method, and save the result in a string variable, extracted date C. Let's print the result, specific date plus 10 days, extracted date C. Now let's put it all together in the main method. Let's create a new instance of calendar example and run it. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see 3 lines of our output. First we have the current date and time, then we have the specific date, and then we have the specific date plus 10 days. The java.time package introduces a modern API for working with dates and times, offering more flexibility and readability. You can use the local date, local time, and local date time along with their format methods to convert to formatted strings. Choose the method that best suits your formatting requirements and the level of control you need. The java.time package is generally preferred for new Java developments due to its improved API and thread safety. Let's take a look at some code. Alright, now let's create a new class, java.time example, implementing the runnable interface, which brings us to implement the run method. Let's announce what we are doing, dates using java.time package. Now let's make use of the local date now method and save it into a new variable local date of type local date. Let's also make use of the local time now method and save the result in a new variable local time of type local time. Let's also make use of the local date time now method and save the result in a new variable local date time of type local date time. Now let's print the dates. Let's print local date, local time, and local date and time. Let's also print local date formatted, in which we take the local date and make use of the format method, in which we provide a format that we create using the datetime formatter of pattern method, and then we apply this format. Let's also output a formatted example for the local time in this format, and for the local date and time in this format. Now let's set specific dates and times, starting with the 22nd February 2022 for the local date, starting with this new date, this new time, and this new date time. Now let's print the dates, local change date, local change time, and local change date time. Let's do the same thing in a formatted variant for the date, for the time, and for the date time. Now let's take a look at how to add days, months, or hours. Let's create a new variable tomorrow of type local date, in which we take the local date variable and add a day. Let's also create a new variable last month of type local date, in which we subtract a month. Let's create a new variable 1 hour later of type local time and add an hour. And let's also create the variable 1 day ago of type local date time, in which we subtract a day. Now let's print those dates. Let's print tomorrow, last month, 1 hour later, 1 day ago. Alright, let's get back to the main method and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of java.time example and run it. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see the various dates and times that we've created, starting with the local date, local time, local date and time, then the formatted examples, then the local change date, change time, change date and time, and their formatted variants, as well as tomorrow, last month, 1 hour later, 1 hour ago. So, what if we want to get the time of a certain time zone? The world is big and has a lot of people, and we all share different times, depending on where we live and what our governments have decided. It is actually quite easy to handle the issue of time zones in Java, using the zone ID class. Here we can define what time zone we want, and then, by taking the UTC time, we can calculate the time that we defined in the zone ID class. Let's create a code example for that. Alright, let's create a new class, timeZoneExample, implementing the runnable interface, which brings us to implement the run method, and announce what we are doing, dates of different time zones. Let's first create a new variable, now, of type instant, and give it the result of the instant now method, which gets us the UTC time. Let's print it right away. Now, and then the variable now. Now let's create time zones. Let's create a time zone for Los Angeles, Rio, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Sydney. Now let's convert the UTC time according to the time zones. For that we're going to create new local date time variables and make use of the addZone method. Let's do that for Los Angeles, Rio, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Sydney. Let's also create a new datetime formatter, which we save in a formatter variable, and in which we assign this format. Alright, let's print everything. Let's print Los Angeles, Rio, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Sydney. Let's go back to the main method and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of timeZoneExample and run it. Now let's build and run the application. And here we can see all the different times. First the UTC time, and then the different cities that we've mentioned. Starting at 6:52 AM in Los Angeles until 11:52 PM in Sydney. Now there could also be a bit of another question that we need to get an answer for. What if we want to get the number of public holidays this year? As this is a very local thing that may change over time, it is difficult to offer an accurate library that provides information about all the public holidays in the entire world. And after a little research on this issue, my result was indeed there is no such functionality in Java that could in any way be called robust. To still solve this issue for being able to provide an example, we will therefore define our own set of public holidays and then calculate the number of those as well as our workdays this year. For this, we assume that we live in Zurich, Switzerland, where we have 11 public holidays this year. Now, this does not mean that we have a free day and that we can spend that time somewhere with a cocktail near a lake with a nice view of somehow. Don't forget that we also need to care about weekends, which in Switzerland consists of Saturday and Sunday. So if we are, let's say, unlucky and a certain public holiday falls on a weekend day instead of a day within the week, well then we do not have extra free time. That's just something we need to live with, right? Okay, and that's also something we need to keep an eye for when coding the logic for that. Let's create a code example. Oh, and also if you want to know more about Java in general, subscribe to this channel as this is the best way to get notified about future videos just like this one. Alright, now let's dive into the code example. Alright, let's create a new class, holiday_example, which implements the runnable interface, also bringing us to implement the run method. Let's announce what we are doing, holidays and workdays according to Zurich, Switzerland, and then let's create a new list holding local date objects, which we call holidays. Now let's add the list of holidays that we have for 2024. Alright, for counting the holidays, let's create a new class, holiday_counter, in which we define a private final variable for the list of holidays, which is assigned over the constructor, holiday_counter, having a parameter, holidays, privately remembering the holidays. Now let's create a new method, countHolidays, returning an int and taking a year as a parameter, starting by defining the holiday count as 0, and then we define ourselves a for loop to walk through all holidays that we have, and then for every holiday we check if it's the right year, and if it is, we add 1 to the counter. After having done all that, we return the count. Let's also create another method, countWorkdays, also returning int, and also taking the year as a parameter. Here we start by defining a workday counter, starting at 0, and then we also define a start and an end date for the year according to the year parameter. Now let's create a new while loop in which we check that we are between the start and the end date. And in every iteration, we check if the current day is not a weekend and not a holiday. And if that is the case, it's a work day. So we add 1 to the counter. After having done that, we add 1 day to the start date. And after having done all that, we return the result to the caller. Now let's also define a new method isHoliday, in which we check if our list of holidays contains a date like the one in our parameter, returning true or false. Let's also create another method isWeekend to check whether a certain day is a weekend or not. And what we do here is make use of the getDayOfWeek method and then check whether that's a Saturday or a Sunday. If yes, we return true, and if not, we return false. Alright, let's get back to the holiday example class and make use of the holiday counter class. So let's create a new instance and provide the holidays. Now let's get the current year, making use of local date now getYear. And now let's count the holidays, making use of the holiday counter, count holidays, and provide the current year, and save the result in a new variable numPublicHolidays. Let's also create another variable numWorkdays, in which we save the result of the holiday counter, count workdays, and provide the current year. Now let's print the current holidays for this year and the current workdays for this year. Alright, let's put it all together in the main method. Let's create a new instance of holiday example and run it. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see the public holidays of 2024 are 11 and the workdays in 2024 are 252. Alright, now there could be a very compatible question that we could ask ourselves, which brings us back a bit to the actual dates. What if we want to get a future date based on workdays? Let's take a look at how to solve this in a code example. Alright, let's create a new class future workday example, implementing the runnable interface, which also brings us to implement the run method. Let's announce what we are doing, future workday with respect to weekends and holidays. Now let's again start by creating a list of all the public holidays that we have based on Zurich. And for calculating the future holiday, let's create a new class future holiday, in which we define a private list of the holidays that we have, for which we create a new instance in our constructor. Now let's create a new method addHolidays, which takes the list of holidays as a parameter and adds it to the local holidays variable. Now let's create a new method getFutureWorkday, returning a local date and taking as first parameter the start date and as the second parameter the days to add. Now let's define a new int variable daysDistance, which we assign a 0. And then we create a new for loop having a range from 1 until to the number provided in days to add. Alright, in every iteration we add 1 to the daysDistance variable. What we also do is create a new variable checkDate of type localDate, in which we put the result of the start date plus the number of days in daysDistance. And now we check whether it is a weekend or a holiday. And if it is, then we add 1 iteration round to the for loop by subtracting 1 from I. Alright, and after the for loop, we return the start date plus the number of days that we have in daysDistance, which respects the days to add and jumps over the weekend days and the holiday days. Alright, let's create another method, getDayDistance, which takes a start date and an end date and returns the number of days between those two dates. And now let's also create a new method, isHoliday, taking the local date to check whether it is a holiday or not. Let's also create a new method, isWeekend, taking the local date, which checks whether the current date is a Saturday or a Sunday. Alright, let's go back to the future workday example class and create a new instance of future holiday. Then we add the holidays that we defined. And then we define a new variable, start date of type localDate, in which we set this date. And now let's take the start date and make use of the getFutureWorkday method to add 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and 5 days. Let's also make use of the dateFormatter class to define this format. And now let's print the start date using the formatter. Now let's print the future workday A using the formatter and also print the distance between the start date and the future workday A. Let's do the same thing for future workday B, C, D, and E. Alright, let's get back to the main method and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of future workday example and run it. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see the start date is the 6th. When we add 1 day, we have a distance of 1, leading us to the 7th. When we add 2 days, we have a distance of 2, leading us to the 8th. When we add 3 days, we have a public holiday, meaning that we have a distance of 4 days, providing us the 10th. And if we add 4 and 5 days, it leads us to a distance of 7 and 8 days, which respects the weekend. Okay, we already know quite a bit about formatting dates as well as calculating dates based on factors like holidays and weekends. Now let's take a look at different calendars. You might ask yourself, what exactly does Gene mean when speaking about different calendars? Well, until to this point, we spoke about the Gregorian calendar, which was introduced by Pope Gregory VIII in 1582 as a reform to the Julian calendar. Well, this was not the only calendar. We also have other calendars, such as the Jewish calendar, also called the Hebrew calendar, as well as the Muslim calendar, also called the Hijri calendar. Covering these calendars is a bit challenging in Java. There are a couple of approaches, but within the time I had for the research, I was not able to find a satisfiable solution that is easy enough to use. Therefore, I changed my approach and searched for an API that provides the information I want, which is the corresponding date of today, the 19th September of 2024. One for the Jewish calendar system and one for the Muslim calendar system. Alright, let's take a look at how to get the dates we want in Java. Alright, now let's create a new class, other calendar example, implementing the runnable interface, which brings us to implement the run method. Let's announce what we are doing, date in other calendars. Let's start by the Gregorian calendar. For that we define a new variable Gregorian date of type local date, in which we define the 19th September 2024. Let's also define a format, which is this, and apply this format and saving the result in a string variable, Gregorian date string. Now let's print it to the terminal. Christian or Gregorian date, and then the Gregorian date string. Now let's continue with the Jewish calendar. For that we're going to create a new class, jewishcalendar. For this we're going to access the API of hebcal.com. Now let's define a new method getJewishDate, in which we provide the Gregorian date. Now let's define a date string variable, in which we will later put the date string that we will return to the caller. Now let's build the HTTP requests, which starts with defining the URI to the API. For that we create a new method, getAPI_URI, which takes the Gregorian date as a parameter. Now this API needs a certain format, which is this one. So let's make use of the formatter. Now let's create a new variable Gregorian date string and get the date according to the format. Next we create a new variable API URL string, in which we place the URL and the start and the end date, which is required by the URL. Now let's convert this string to a URI object, which we save in API URI, and then we return it. Alright, let's go back to the JewishDate method. When we access the API, we get a response in a JSON format. So let's create a new method, getJSON from API, defining a new string variable JSON, which we will use to get the JSON in there so that we can return it to the caller. What we want to do now is make use of the HTTP request method to get a new builder, provide the API URL, tell the HTTP request that we want to make an HTTP GET call, and then build it. Now we want to send the request and get the response. For that we need a new HTTP client, which we will use to send the request and get the response in an HTTP response string object. As this can result in an IO exception or an interrupted exception, let's put it into a try-catch context. Then we should also check the status code of the response and only accept it if it is 200, which means OK. If it is anything other than that, we print an error, Jewish calendar error, API response code not 200. But in case it is 200, we get the response body, which is the JSON, and then we return it to the caller. Alright, now at this point we have the JSON. So the JSON we get is pretty simple. It looks a bit like this one here. What we want to have here is the HDate value, which gives us the string 16 Elul 5784. So to do that, we need to walk the path from items 0 until HDate. Alright, here's how to do that. For that we create a new method parseJSON_response, in which we provide the JSON. Then we define a new date string, which is the date that we want to return. Then we define ourselves a new object mapper. And we also define ourselves a JSON node, which we call root node, in which we make use of the mapper readTree method, which takes the JSON as a parameter. As the readTree method can result in a JSON process exception, we put it into a try-catch context. Alright, let's continue. Now let's get the items node that we want to have. For that we access the root node, we get items, and there we get the index 0. Now that we have the items node, we can get the HDate, which we convert to string, and save it into a new string variable HDate. Let's also get the same result in Hebrew, accessing the Hebrew node, and putting it into a new string variable Hebrew. Alright, let's put it together in the date string. First the Latin version, and then the Hebrew version. Alright, and now let's return the string to the caller. And as this is also the return string for the getJewishDate, we also return it from here to the caller. Now let's get back to the class otherCalendar example and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of jewishcalendar, and then we define a new string variable, jewishDateString, in which we put the result of the getJewishDate method, providing the Gregorian date. Let's also print it, Jewish or Hebrew date, and then the Jewish date string. Alright, let's go back to the main method and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of otherCalendar example and run it. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see that we first output the Christian or the Gregorian date, which is the 19th September 2024. And then we output the Jewish or the Hebrew date, which is the 16th of Elul 5784. And the same output in Hebrew. Now the Jewish calendar is not the only one, we also have the Muslim calendar. For that, let's create a new class, muslimcalendar, in which we also access a REST API, which is aladhan.com. Let's create a new method, getMuslimDate, returning a string, and take in the Gregorian date as a parameter, in which we again have to define the URI. For this we also need the date, but in a different format, which is this one. Let's put it into a string so that we can use it in the URL, which would be this one, plus the Gregorian date string. Now the API URL string has to be converted to a URI object, which can be done using the create method, and then we return the result. Now this API also communicates a JSON. So for that, let's create a new method, getJSON from API, providing the API URI. Here again, we make use of the HTTP request class, defining a new builder, providing the URI, defining that we access using HTTP GET, and building it. Now we want to send the request and get the response. For that we need a new HTTP client so that we can use the client to send the requests that we just defined. As the send method can result in an IO exception or an interrupted exception, we put it into a try-catch context. Here we also need to check if the HTTP status code is 200. If it is not, we print an error, Muslim calendar error, API response code is not 200. But if it is 200, we get our JSON by accessing the body of the HTTP response. Alright, let's return it to the caller and get back to the getMuslimDate method. Now we have a response which looks a bit like this one. Here we have to access a couple of nodes to build ourselves a string that we can return to the terminal. So what we want to access here is the day, the month and the year. And we also want this in the Arab version, which we get from the AR nodes. Alright, for that we're going to create a new method called parseJSONResponse, which takes the JSON string as a parameter. Here we first define the date string and the mapper, and then we define ourselves a new JSON node, which uses the object mapper readTree method and takes the JSON string. As the readTree can result in a JSON processing exception, we put it into a try-catch context. Now we can start by accessing the data node. And having done that, we can access the Hijri node. Now we can get the day node and save it into a string variable called day. We can also get the month node, which we save in a string month en, and the Arab version month ar. And we can also get the year, which we save in a string variable year. Now we can put it all together. First the Latin version, and then the Arab version. Alright, let's return it to the caller. Now we are back in the method getMuslimDate. And here we also return the date string to the caller. So let's get back to the class otherCalendar example and put it all together. Let's create a new instance of muslimcalendar. Then we make use of the getMuslimDate, providing the Gregorian date, and save the result in a new string variable muslimDateString. Now let's print it to the terminal, Muslim or Hijri date, and then the Muslim date string. Let's build and run the application. And here we can see the result. Muslim Hijri date, 15th Rabi al-Awwal 1446, and also the Arab version. Alright, we made it through the topic of date formatting in Java with a couple of extras. To sum it all up, we started with 2 examples using the date and the calendar class. We then moved on to using the java.time package and showed how to create different date formats. After that, we continued to time zone examples, as well as further examples which respect public holidays as well as weekends. Last but not least, we showed how to dive into other calendar systems, such as the Jewish calendar and the Muslim calendar. That's it, not more, not less. Could I teach you something new, or could I fascinate you with new approaches of handling dates in Java? Tap the like button and also subscribe to this channel, as this is the best way to get notified about future videos with content just like in this video. There's also another thing concerning the other date systems. I tried to find a reliable API for the Chinese calendar and also for various Indian calendars, like the vikramsamvat, the saka samvat, and the panchang. But the research for those proved to be quite challenging actually. So if you happen to be someone who knows a good and free API, well then please write a comment in the comment section of this video. I think this is quite an interesting topic that can also interest many other people. So why not help each other out? Okay, I would like to thank you very much for watching. My name is Gene. See you next video.